Psychology of Hermione Granger, the shadow of perfectionism. Everyone loves Hermione Granger, the brilliant witch who saved Harry Potter countless times. The girl who proved that hard work beats natural talent. But what if I told you that beneath that perfect exterior lies one of the most psychologically damaged characters in the entire series? What if the traits we celebrate in Hermione are actually symptoms of deep psychological trauma that nobody wants to talk about? This is the shadow psychology of Hermione Granger, and the truth is darker than you think. Let's start with something the movies conveniently skip. Hermione Granger is an 11-year-old girl ripped from everything she knows. Her parents are dentists, normal people, muggles. And suddenly she discovers she's a witch in a world that has spent centuries treating people like her parents as inferior. Imagine the psychological weight of that revelation. Carl Jung archetypes teach us about the orphan archetype, the child separated from their origin, forced to prove their worth in a hostile environment. That's Hermione's starting point. But here's where depth psychology reveals something sinister. She doesn't just adapt to the wizarding world. She becomes obsessed with mastering it, with proving she deserves to exist in it. On the Hogwarts Express, before she even arrives at school, she's already memorized entire textbooks. She's practiced spells. She knows Hogwarts history better than students who grew up in magical families. This isn't enthusiasm. This is anxiety manifesting as compulsive preparation. Hermione arrives at Hogwarts wearing an invisible armor made of knowledge because deep in her unconscious mind, she believes that if she's not perfect, she'll be rejected. Again. The shadow self whispers to her constantly that she's an imposter in a world where she doesn't belong. Watch how she behaves in her first classes. She doesn't just answer questions. She erupts with answers, hands shooting up desperately, interrupting others, needing to prove her intelligence every single moment. Professor McGonagall praises her. Snape insults her. But notice the pattern in her behavioral psychology. Praise doesn't satisfy her. She needs more. Always more. One correct answer isn't enough. She needs every answer. When Ron makes that cruel comment about her being a nightmare, something breaks inside her. She hides in a bathroom crying alone. And this reveals the core of her psychological trauma. Hermione's entire sense of self-worth is external. She exists through validation. Without it, she crumbles. The troll incident forces her to lie to protect Harry and Ron, and suddenly she has friends. But examine this friendship through Jungian analysis. Harry and Ron don't just become her friends. They become her purpose. Her new metric for self-worth. She stops trying to prove herself to teachers and starts proving herself to them. Every piece of homework she does for Ron. Every rule she breaks for Harry. Every dangerous situation she throws herself into. This is codependency dressed up as loyalty. The psychology community would recognize this immediately as a trauma response where the victim attaches their identity to others because they have no solid sense of self. As the years progress at Hogwarts, Hermione's perfectionism mutates into something more dangerous. Third year reveals the most disturbing evidence. The time turner. Let's talk about what this device actually represents in terms of psychological breakdown. Hermione convinces the teachers to let her use a device that allows her to exist in multiple timelines simultaneously so she can take every possible class. Read that again. A 13-year-old girl fragments her existence because she cannot accept the human limitation of time. She literally breaks the laws of physics to maintain her perfect student image. The movies play this for laughs. The books describe her as exhausted, snapping at friends on the edge of collapse. This is textbook burnout. This is what happens when perfectionism becomes a psychological disorder. Hermione is physically and mentally destroying herself, and everyone around her just calls her ambitious. Nobody stops her. Nobody gets her help. And here's the truly dark part that depth psychology exposes. She doesn't even enjoy most of these classes. Divination frustrates her because it's not concrete. Muggle studies is redundant for her. But she takes them anyway because her shadow self tells her that dropping a class equals failure equals worthlessness equals rejection from the magical world. The time turner nearly kills her multiple times, causes her chronic stress, and disrupts her sleep patterns for an entire year. The cost of her perfectionism is her mental health, and she pays it willingly. But the real horror of Hermione's psychology reveals itself in her relationships and the violence hidden beneath her perfect surface. Let's examine the psychological patterns nobody discusses. Fourth year, Ron starts dating someone else. Hermione's reaction? She doesn't communicate. She doesn't process her feelings in a healthy way. Instead, she uses magic to attack him with a flock of conjured birds that physically harm him. Pause on that. Hermione Granger, the voice of reason, weaponizes magic to hurt someone because she's emotionally overwhelmed. This is dark psychology manifesting as violence. Then there's Marietta Edgecombe, a girl who betrays Dumbledore's army under pressure from her mother who works at the Ministry. Hermione's response? She curses Marietta with a permanent disfiguring scar across her face that spells out sneak. This isn't justice. This is cruelty. This is disproportionate retaliation that reveals something terrifying about Hermione's hidden mind. When the perfectionist loses control, when someone breaks her rules, she becomes judge, jury, and executioner. No mercy. No second chances. Permanent consequences. Character analysis reveals this as a defense mechanism born from trauma. Hermione cannot tolerate chaos or betrayal because her entire psychological structure is built on rigid control. When that control breaks, so does her morality. Fifth year brings Rita Skeeter, and here we see Hermione's shadow self in full force. She discovers Rita is an illegal animagus, and instead of reporting her to authorities, Hermione kidnaps her, traps her in a jar, and blackmails her. Let that sink in. The rule-following perfect student commits multiple serious crimes including kidnapping, false imprisonment, and extortion. And she feels no remorse. She smiles about it. She uses Rita as a weapon later to spread her own narrative. This is where Jungian psychology becomes critical. Carl Jung taught us that the shadow contains everything we refuse to acknowledge about ourselves. Hermione's shadow contains rage, vindictiveness, need for control, and a capacity for cruelty that she justifies through her own moral framework. She's not following rules anymore. She's become so obsessed with being right that she'll break any rule to punish people she deems wrong. The hero psychology we assign to Hermione starts to crack when we realize she exhibits many traits of villain psychology. Control. Inability to forgive. Disproportionate punishment. Lack of empathy for those she considers enemies. The only difference between Hermione and a villain is which side she chose. The final years at Hogwarts should show growth, but instead they reveal repetition. Hermione's trauma psychology hasn't healed. It's intensified. She's still the one pushing Harry and Ron, still the one carrying the weight, still the one who cannot rest. During the Horcrux hunt, when they're living in a tent, starving and hopeless, Hermione is still trying to research solutions in books. She cannot sit still. She cannot accept not knowing. Her anxiety manifests as constant motion, constant planning, constant control. When Ron leaves, she breaks down completely. Not because she loves Ron, though she does, but because his departure confirms her deepest unconscious fear, that she's not enough, that people will always leave her, that her perfectionism couldn't prevent abandonment. The Locket Horcrux preys on this during Ron's return, showing him visions of Harry and Hermione together. But notice what it doesn't show. It doesn't show Hermione's fear. What? Because Hermione's fear isn't about losing Harry to another girl. Her fear is about losing her purpose. If Harry doesn't need her anymore, who is she? Personality analysis reveals that Hermione has no identity separate from her function. She is what she does for others. Remove that, and there's just a terrified girl who never learns she has intrinsic worth. The war ends. Voldemort dies. Hermione survives. And here's where the psychological theory gets truly disturbing. Does Hermione heal? The epilogue suggests she marries Ron, has children, and presumably continues being exceptional. But that's not healing. That's pattern repetition. Hermione returns to Hogwarts to complete her education while Harry and Ron don't. She continues to the Ministry and rises quickly through the ranks. She writes books. She changes legislation. She never stops achieving. And everyone calls this a happy ending. But let's apply psychoanalysis to this trajectory. Hermione is still running from the same unconscious mind fears that drove her at 11. She's still proving her worth through achievement. She's still unable to rest. She's transferred her perfectionism from grades to career, from Hogwarts to the Ministry, from proving herself to teachers to proving herself to history. The trauma remains unaddressed. The mental health patterns remain toxic. She's successful, yes, but is she healthy? Is she happy? Or is she still that little girl on the train, desperate to memorize every spell because deep down she believes she doesn't deserve to exist in the magical world? Here's what makes Hermione's story truly tragic from a psychological perspective. She represents what society rewards but psychology warns against. We celebrate her workaholism. We praise her inability to accept failure. We admire her sacrifice of personal well-being for achievement. But these are the exact traits that lead to burnout, anxiety disorders, depression, and breakdown. Hermione Granger is suffering throughout the entire series, and we call it admirable. We hold her up as a role model for young girls, teaching them that their worth comes from being perfect, from knowing everything, from sacrificing everything. This is toxic. This is dangerous. And this is exactly what psychological trauma does. It convinces the victim that their survival mechanism is their identity. Hermione believes her perfectionism saved her. In reality, it's slowly destroying her from the inside. The shadow of perfectionism that follows Hermione Granger is the shadow that follows millions of real people. The students who study until they collapse. The employees who work until they break. The perfectionists who equate any mistake with complete worthlessness. We live in a world that creates Hermiones constantly, then wonders why anxiety and depression rates skyrocket. We reward the trauma response and call it success. We celebrate the psychological damage and call it dedication. Hermione Granger is not a hero despite her flaws. She's a tragedy because of them. And the saddest part? She never gets the help she needs. Nobody in the wizarding world ever suggests that maybe, just maybe, the brightest witch of her age needs therapy more than she needs another outstanding grade. Nobody tells her that she's enough without the achievements. Nobody helps her build an identity beyond being useful. She remains trapped in the prison of her own making, and we applaud from outside the bars. So the next time you watch Harry Potter and you see Hermione with her hand raised, desperate to answer, remember what you're really seeing. You're seeing a child in pain. You're seeing psychological patterns born from trauma. You're seeing the shadow self in action, convincing a brilliant girl that she only deserves love if she's perfect. And you're seeing what society does to people like her. We use them. We praise them. We burn them out. And when they break, we find another perfectionist to replace them. Hermione Granger deserved better. She deserved someone to tell her that being human, being flawed, being imperfect doesn't make her less worthy of belonging. She deserved healing, not just achievement. But in a world that values productivity over mental health, in a story that needed a brilliant sidekick more than it needed to address psychological trauma, Hermione remains trapped. Perfect on the outside. Screaming on the inside. Forever proving her worth to people who should have told her she never needed to. That's the real magic of Hermione Granger. Not the spells she cast or the puzzles she solved. But the mirror she holds up to our society, showing us exactly what we do to our brightest minds. We break them. We call it success. And we never even notice the damage until it's far too late. The shadow of perfectionism isn't just Hermione's burden. It's ours too. And until we recognize it, until we address it, until we stop celebrating psychological trauma as ambition, we'll keep creating more Hermiones. More brilliant, damaged people who believe their worth is earned, not inherent. More victims of a system that values what you do over who you are. Hermione Granger is fictional. But the pain she represents is devastatingly real. And it's time we finally acknowledged it.